Hello everyone, welcome to the Pangburn live Hangout channel. Today we're going to be discussing Jordan Peterson, all things Jordan Peterson, Bill C-16, his 12 Rules for Life book, some of the critiques that have been issued against him. So, if anybody would like to join the live stream on the Pangburn Offensive YouTube channel, you can join the live chat and get along with everyone there. And would anyone like to have the opening remarks? We can go around here. If Diraj, I think do you wanna say something? Um, Sorry, what was that? Uh, Sorry, what was that? Uh, Great. What do you think? Do you think there's any issues with Jordan Peterson, his work, his rhetoric, some of the things he says? Yeah. Right. Do you think? Right. Okay. And do you think these critiques of Jordan Peterson? Do you think they're some isolated branch of his philosophy, or do you think they can be tied in with everything else he says? Right. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. Okay.
Or like some mystical claims or other native religions. But these claims that he makes are very unique and they're very psychology driven. And he might read some of those religious works through that psychology lens, but whether that's just Jordan Peterson's version of of what Greek theology is like, or if that's the actual how Greek theology works out. I haven't ever seen anyone else quote the Jungian archetypes for Greek gods like him. Or maybe I'm
Yeah.
just not that well read. Maybe but I
Does
don't
anybody
know
else
that he
want?
has the same qualifications to say that. Sorry. Oh, yeah, I'll finish.
Yeah, let's let everybody else get in here. Simba, do you have any thoughts on that? Does anybody else want to share or expand upon what was just said, or give their own thoughts? Neurotic shrimp.
I mean, yeah, I like Jordan Peterson a lot, and I get what he's saying because, like, I am interested in psychology, and like, I do think about how people think, and with regards to Jordan Peterson kind of projecting onto the Greek mythologies and to the biblical stories, I have 2 points. I think the first one is that it's with a work of art, you have many ways to interpret it, and so it's like a story, it's a narrative, and you can interpret it in many ways. And I do think those people were trying to grapple with the ideas, but they didn't have the best way of articulating it.
Right.
And yeah, and so I think that's kind of Jordan Peterson also is, I suppose, putting a psychological lens on it. But it's not to say that they weren't trying to get those ideas articulated in some way. I think the best like God story might be the story of Cupid, because I think we can all relate to like being shot with an arrow and like doing stupid things. I think that's like a story that many people would have might have gone through at some point. So
Right.
like
Okay.
I do agree with lots of what he said.
I see. Do you think it's necessary for us to come up with these stories? Do you think we can just come up with ethics ourselves, or do we need to rely upon such stories in order to come up with it?
I think the stories put a label to what's going on, and like the argument would be you tell a million stories and then you simplify it to 1,000 stories and you simplify it to maybe 10 or 15 stories. You're still going to act that out, but if you know the stories, you will be able to act better.
I see. Okay. Does anybody else want to comment on that? Or get in on the conversation? No? Right, so I'll ask you about the stories then. Which stories of his do you think are most relatable to you, do you think?
Most relatable to me?
Yeah, like because you said that you've found some kind of personal satisfaction in them. So
Yeah. So right now, the idea that I'm chewing on is actually from the book written by Nietzsche. Because I'm interested in symbolism, and he talks about three symbols, uh, specifically a camel, and then a lion, and then a child. And what he means by that is, first for the camel, is the idea of taking on burden, carrying weight, working, laboring, even in like a desert that's hard to work through. And then the second symbol in his book was a lion, which is kind of roaring against society. Whenever society says you shall, the lion says I will not. Whenever the society says you shall not, the lion says I will. It's just roaring, it's fighting, it's speaking loudly, it's going against the grain. And then a child, so you just return to a nice simple mindset. You don't get worked up, you just keep a child mindset. And that's kind of the symbolism that Nietzsche proposes in Thus Spake Zarathustra. And he does like rail on all religions. He takes a baseball bat to Christianity, he takes a baseball bat to paganism, and that's kind of what I'm chewing on right now.
right, okay. Wait, he takes a baseball bat to Christianity, you said?
Yeah. He so in Thus Spake Zarathustra, he says something like they suffer, and it's only once you suffer then you get angry in your righteousness, and so in their righteousness they're always angry.
Right. Is
And
that
that's
not a
because
criticism? Is that not a criticism of the stories in Christianity?
yeah, that's kind of he doesn't use the word Christianity, but he strongly hints at it. I felt that they're
And
just
Jordan
like
Peterson uses Christian literature quite a lot, doesn't he?
yeah, he does, and I see value in Christian literature, but Nietzsche does take a baseball bat to it, like baseball bat being over strong.
Right, okay. So
But
do you see value
yeah,
in things like the story of the talking serpent or the story of Noah's flood? Do you think these stories have some kind of underlying meaning to them? Or are they just because you often hear the
I
criticism
do.
that these are just primitive societies trying to come up with ways to explain the world? Do you see it that way?
I
Or
do see that. I do see value in the Christian stories.
oh,
Like I've read the Bible 3 times. I see value in it. I can accept Nietzsche's point and the biblical point of view. They both have good points to me.
do you not think that given the origin of these stories that maybe we shouldn't take them with such weight, given the fact that they're not exactly, authoritative, let's say?
We shouldn't take them such weight because they're not
Yeah, because like
authoritative.
the Jordan Peterson-esque types take a lot from the Bible, a lot more than what's actually in it. Some would critics argue. So how do you feel about taking stories from a book that was written by primitive societies who didn't even understand how the world worked? That's their criticism.
Uh, I take a lot from the Bible. Primitive. You say primitive, like how primitive? Like these people
Like in
were
the
trying
sense
to
that there was
camp something.
widespread beliefs that was held by the people of those times, which we now know not to be true. So, for example, in the Bible, the virginity test of the woman, saying that you can test empirically whether or not a woman has has broken her virginity. The story of Noah's flood, which has been, for example,
Yeah,
major
if you
sign.
and I read a paragraph in the Bible, I promise you we would interpret it very differently. For sure.
Is there not like a
I'm
lens?
confident in
Is
that.
there not like a scope of interpretation across which you can't go out? So you could say that there's different interpretations
Because
you
I
can
don't
make.
take it to be a literal book. I take it to be a deeply metaphorical book. Is how I take it.
Right. So is there any parts of the Bible which are literal?
No, like literal.
None.
I don't use it for a literal lens. I use it as a very metaphorical lens. I don't take it literally.
So how
Like
does
I don't literally take a camel and like you know.
Can I
wait?
jump
Are
in
you
here as
are you
well?
religious? If you don't mind. Sorry, go on.
I
yeah,
don't go to
you.
mass. I've
Sorry,
read the Bible
Jolly.
3
I think
times.
Jolly wanted to get in there.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So I was going to say this was kind of the crux of where my criticism of like Peterson actually is. This conversation we sort of have, because usually when he's talking about these things that he says, so like he claims that he's a Christian, and then when people ask him, "Oh, do you believe that Jesus rose from the dead?" Then he'll sort of go, "Well, it's very interesting, and it's very complicated." When
I
most of us
personally don't believe a man named Jesus walked the earth. Personally,
Yeah, but see, he does. So he doesn't say that, when he's asked, he'll just sort of go, "Well, it depends what you mean by Jesus, and depends what you mean by when you
yeah.
say he was risen."
Do you
And
think
like,
that's
it's
coming
kind of
from a
like,
place
well,
of genuine confusion, or do you think that's coming from a place of him not wanting to admit the fact that he doesn't believe it?
yeah, yeah. Well, I think because that's where if he was a little bit more certain on that, then I would know that his other claims about theology are more coming from a space of knowledge, because it just seems like he's convoluting even straightforward claims so much, like that you just ask, if you do you believe in Jesus being the literal Son of God and having these things, and he's like, "Well, it depends what you mean. Just depends what you mean." And
Yeah.
like,
So it
it's kind
depends
of like,
what you
well,
mean.
it doesn't really. There's not much dependence on that. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward claim when you're talking to West. I mean, I talk about, say, the impersonal God, right? Like in when we're talking theism and atheism, where I equate existence to God, and that's literally in the scriptures of some Eastern texts. So I'm not convoluting, like straightforward biblical perspective where God is literally personal or has a personality or relationship. There's an original sin. There's a reason why Jesus came and got crucified and all that sort of stuff. So these things are quite straightforward. But he sort of goes, it depends what you mean by Jesus, and depends what you mean by rose from the
Yeah.
dead, and depends on what He just convolutes that stuff. And when I do that to more straightforward doctrines like the Eastern ones, which I'm not even talking about a personal God, and people go, well, why do you call that God? And it's like, well, what has Jordan Peterson called his concepts Christianity is what I would like to know, because
So
he just
so what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? A large way that people navigate this world, like
mm,
especially 10 years ago, is that they want like a rational, thought out explanation, and they want hard
mhm,
details, and
yep,
they want it, yeah, and they want to use it through that lens. While
yes.
there's another lens that's a spiritual lens, which you're not looking through the literal, you're looking through metaphors and patterns of behavior, and
Well, I
people
think he
don't really
knows when he's.
distinguish between that.
Oh yeah, for me, I think he knows the context of where that question is coming from. So I mean, people aren't asking, oh, like from the perspective of like your own perspective, concept, lens of what Christianity means. I think when people ask him, are you a Christian? He knows what culture. So I'm sure he's smart enough and aware enough to know where when someone asks that question, what baggage with that term is. I mean, like it's the convolutions are largely in his own head, and he's sort of going, well, it depends what I mean by Christianity, and it depends on what you mean by Christianity. But he knows what the other guy's asking when he's asking, "Are you a Christian?" And he's sort of going, well, it depends, and it's like, well, it doesn't really depend. Like
Because the Bible makes weird statements. You get statements like the Lion of the tribe of Judah, which is a very weird statement to make, and it's not a very literal thing. But
Mhm.
like maybe it's the
But I think
person
when
that
you ask,
speaks out loudly and like kind of
yeah.
betrays God, like Jesus, and sells them kind of a metaphor playing out thing, and not like a literal. How I don't know how you take that very literally. You know.
Sure, but I think that the concept of Jesus being the literal Son of God. I mean, like so somebody asked, like I think they even asked him very specific questions, like, "Do you think he rose from the dead?" And he was like, "Well, it depends on what you mean by rose from the dead." Like that's, I mean, Yeah, I don't think it needed to be that complicated as he made it. That specific
Yeah.
claim.
What was the question? If you guys don't mind, a newcomer chiming in.
They're asking, is
oh,
it valid, the critiques of Jordan Peterson saying that he's too vague with his terminology with regards to look at Amy's kids with regards to the Christian tradition?
The guy before he came across as acting as if JT wasn't biased towards Christianity, and he obviously is, and he bashes all religions, both sides, and Dorat was correct. Like, no, that's not true. He's biased, and he's promoting Christianity, and he's like, well, he talks about stories,
It's your bias.
just straight to the point. He's just pushing Christianity in saying,
Mr. Crypto
that it's more beneficial to society, which is his point.
Yeah. So, Mr. Crypto Kim, what do you think about that?
I think, well, I think when someone asks a question like, "What is a Christian?" I think the correct answer would be to say someone who believes in the Trinity. I think the Trinity is what keeps Christians distinctive.
That's not necessary.
Versus Mormonism. Someone who believes that God the Father, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit are all God. I think any other, all the denominations of Christianity, including Catholicism, believe in the Trinity, but something considered a quote-unquote cult, like Mormonism, and then we could go into the definition of what is a cult, but that's not really what we're talking about. But
so let me ask you,
quote
so what would you say?
But I mean, like, just
okay,
for like Mormonism, they don't necessarily believe in the Trinity. Muslims, they don't believe in the Trinity. I think Jordan Peterson, just to go back on that, I think he takes a much more psychological approach to the biblical text. I think what he does is I think he's been very influenced by Carl Jung, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
He did.
Can we let Zemo get in there? Can we let Zemo get in to the conversation? Zemo, you had some thoughts?
I was just saying 100% absolutely. He's very, very influenced by Jung. I mean, all his archetypal stuff.
You're breaking bad.
Sorry, your mic's not very clear. Could you try and maybe unmute it, unmute it.
Like rejoin.
Yeah. In the meantime, could I ask you, Mr. Crypto Kim, what would you say to the early church fathers who weren't necessarily Trinitarians? Like, there was Binitarianism for a while, where people didn't believe that the Holy Spirit was God, but they believed in the Father and the Son. There was subordinatism, where people claimed that the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit were all God, but there was a subordinate dynamic between them, in that the Son was subordinate to the Father. So, would you say these people were not Christian, the early church fathers?
I would say that maybe the interpretation is a little bit mistaken. So, I mean, for example, like my father, I would be subordinate to my father, as in I listen to what he says. He raised me, but we are both human, so we are equal as humans. So I think within the Trinity there is subordination, as well as equality. I think those two can coexist. I don't think those two are independent of each other.
I think
do you understand what I'm saying?
Heretical. No, because the church doesn't define the Trinity as such. The Trinity isn't seen through the lens of subordinate.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, the example that I just gave, like, I am subordinate to my father. I listen to what my father says, at least when I was a child. Yeah. I am submissive to my father. I'm subordinate. But we're both equal in that we're both human. He's not superior to me. He's not some superior being to me. We're both human. So we're equal, but I am submissive to him. He is dominant over me,
so you
but
say
we
that
are
from an
equal.
Ontological...
So I think especially like especially in the way we interpret things today in secular society, we interpret things as so hierarchical. and then we see things as like better or worse, and then we equate those things to equal or non-equal. But for me, I don't see those things as independent of each other when we're talking about biblical literature. I see that we can be submissive and equal at the same time.
Right. Okay.
That's all I have to say.
Nivek, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, like, my view with JP is that he's saying, like, society modernized to where it is thanks to Christianity, where, like, if that was true, if it had its way in upholding traditional norms, we'd still be in the medieval age and we wouldn't have gone nowhere. If nothing, it probably held us back a couple centuries. That's my view on it.
Would you argue that maybe it wasn't necessarily the progressive social views that pushed us forward, rather it was the Industrial Revolution and the revolutions in technology?
Yeah, it was more about like leaning away from that, because people in the past, they thought through subjective thinking, like with the Black Plague, with why people were dying, and they were thinking that it was because of the tolerance of undesirables within society. God was punishing them, and people were just massacring the hell out of each other, and up to the point where it was like, people started it bent their leaning away from religious worldview towards the science revolution and into the Renaissance.
Do you necessarily think
more
that religion
towards reasoning? So it's actually the opposite of direction of leaning away from it more.
Do you think religion pushes people away from science?
Well, I mean, like, if you not away from science, towards it.
Religion pushes people towards science.
Yeah.
So then, as people get more religious, we become more scientific.
Yeah, because if you approach something in an irrational way, like saying it was God punishing us
So
for
as we become more
undesirables
religious, we become
within
less scientific.
society, it made people try to think, okay, well, we should more think through subjective fact and reasoning of why things happen.
Sorry, I think Neurotic Shrimp wanted to get into that. What did you want to say there?
So, like, I have two things to say. The first one, immediately, two ways of thinking. You can think super rationally by, like, for the scientific mind, and you can think emotionally using your gut, and both valuable ways of thinking. Lots of people get by trusting their gut, so to speak. They felt it in their heart. With Jordan Peterson and Carl Jung, quickly, he involved in politics. He started having nightmares, and what happened for his experience is he read a book by Carl Jung that said, read the stories and then your nightmares will go away. So he tried it, and it worked for him. So that's why he's so involved with Carl Jung. That's what happened.
All right, okay. So do you think these two roots is
Okay.
knowledge?
Can I respond to that?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
See, the problem is when you think through your gut.
Sorry. Zemo, your mic.
That you have
Nivek, could you stop?
Can you hear me?
Zemo, your mic still isn't working properly.
God fucking damn it.
Yeah, the
Right,
problem when you
Nivek,
think
you
through your
can carry
gut
on.
is when you have less knowledge of something to reason with logically. You would end up thinking through a fear of what and who you don't understand, because you'd see it as a potential threat. That's
Right.
just how human beings are. If something is if there's
saying that the rational
so that's how come people that were
misguided.
different within society,
Sorry, I think Neurotic
that are
Shrimp, what
less
did you want?
relatable, that are marginalized, you burn them.
Nivek, my friend. Neurotic Shrimp, did you want to get on that?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to get his words out for him. Because,
Okay.
yeah, like what I'm hearing you say is that they'll be so enveloped in the spiritual that they'll kind of abandon the rational. It's not a terrible point. I mean, usually people that do that, they're probably not carrying torches and angry, but they're kind of dumber. Like, I can agree with that. We should still
Right.
try to be rational, but I see value in both.
Nivik, I was
Okay.
gonna ask you. Nivik, I was gonna ask you before we move on. I was gonna
I
ask
wanted
you.
to add to what he just said for a minute.
Okay, go on.
If you have a view of a person that they killed somebody, and you hate them, and a lot of that could feed into the negative view that you have by that person, not being a normal around society. You know what I mean? So it would feed into your negative biases where you would act off you'd act off of your emotions,
Self-flagellate.
off of thinking through your emotions of hate and anger instead of fact. So a person that is innocent of something, you know what I mean, that you get enough fact when it comes to that person, your view of that person could change based off of that. Your view of thinking of that person being a piece of filth or being bad, by getting certain facts, that'll change your mindset of your emotions.
Just to go ahead and throw my 2 cents in there. There's this idea in I think it's Buddhism, or a sect of Buddhism, where there are 3 centers of energy located within the body. One is right between the forehead, which a lot of people might recognize as the pineal gland. One right within the chest, which is your heart. It's your expressive energy center. And then your grounded energy center, which is in your navel, about 3 centimeters below your belly button. And that's called the lower dantian, your gut. It's literally where your gut is. And it's
I
where
thought
the
you were going to talk
term
about the lizard brain.
gut. Yeah, well, I mean, it's where the term gut instinct comes from. And I think especially today, where we're so inundated through the mind, we're so stimulated through the mind, our pineal gland, our eyes, everything on the top part of our body, the top 20%, that we tend to neglect that which comes from our gut. So I think people that do tend to gravitate towards their gut and their emotions, how they feel. I think a lot of people do that because they feel that they've been oversaturated with mental processing. And I understand that. And I also understand where thinking from your gut, feeling isn't always accurate. It's very, very true. I think there needs to be a balance, right? And it's easy to say that there needs to be a balance. I think where the gray area comes in is that where is the balance from a point that is already unbalanced? Because it's easy to find a balance between a standard point, but because right now we're so mentally stimulated, where is the balance point between mental stimulation and, I think, what some people would label as instinct or feeling? Because there is a real, what's the word?
You get where I'm coming from when
So
you
how-
have more of an
Value.
understanding. When you
There's
have
a
more of
real
an understanding,
value for
you get
that.
Sorry,
you get where I'm
Nivik, what you
coming from.
say?
When you have more of an understanding, there's less of a potential of fearing or someone. You know, it, the unknown. People naturally fear the unknown, and so you would naturally, through self-preservation, that's just a normal animal instinct. You would act off of what could potentially happen, even though that there might not be a danger there. It's just that the fact that something is unknown, you don't know.
I
So
want to
why
build
take
on
So
Mike's
for
idea.
example, I guess like for example is when I hear what you're saying, I agree. Okay. And then when I listen to how you're saying it, there's just a little bit of a discombobulation there.
What's that?
Well, I mean, just because there seems like there's a tension, right?
He's
There's a
trying to. I don't fault him for that. He's trying to bend the
and
word.
I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that that's a consequence of
Can I build on
what's
what
the
you're
I'm
saying?
word
talking
for it?
about I'm
There's just
talking
a
about the logic.
consequence.
I'm talking about the
There's a
logic of emotion.
So could we go one at a
there's a
time? Could we all go one at a time?
consequence
Could we all go one
of
at a time?
how there's just a consequence of how energy is
Fields.
circulated within certain parts of the body. Do you understand what I'm saying? So there's a
Yeah.
difference
So
between
can I?
thinking thoughts, and then there's a difference between being able to actually say those thoughts clearly and to process them clearly real into the real world where you're actually actualizing them. Because right
So,
now it's all, if it's in your thoughts, it's just in your thoughts. No one in the real world knows. It's not real. And then when you try to manifest your thoughts into the real world, it comes out stuttered, it comes out short breathed, it comes out nervous,
So
it
could we let
comes out
Neurotic Shrimp address that?
anxious.
Yeah.
yeah.
And so what I'm
So your
saying
idea is very
is
close to the
So
idea of
there's a
chakras.
balance. It's a
could we let
balance.
him talk,
No,
Mr.
it's not even
Crypto?
about chakras. It's not even
Uh,
about
we
it's
do.
not even about chakras. Do you
Okay, when
understand
you're
what
done,
I'm
I want to go.
saying?
You go on, Mr.
So
Neurotic Shrimp.
there's an idea of chakras where they also identify quote unquote energy centers, and they identify like the brain, and they move down to like the mouth where you speak, the neck. They work all the way down your back, then to your root, and like the root is kind of where you fuck from, so to speak. So it's kind of alive, but it's very grounded, and you kind of do this. They with yoga, they kind of literally work the muscle tension around because if you don't fuck very well, your hips are literally very tight and they're not very loose. And then that kind of carries throughout the whole spine. They use the term energy and metaphor. I mean, happens in my estimate to overlap. But then if it doesn't feel right, very from your gut, so to speak, from the lower area, then it doesn't transpire on the higher level, so to speak. So the rational thought doesn't seem to strike the chord, so to speak, and that's kind of an idea of chakras that I've more understood than say the Buddhist methodology.
Yeah, that's
Ideas.
yeah, I'm very interested in the physical manifestation of energy, and I think what that comes down to is the breath, which is what a lot of yogis focus on, manipulation of the breath.
For sure.
Chakra points, I think that's a lot more ethereal, and I think yeah, there's a lot of basis towards that. But for me, I like physical manifestations of my energy, and I like experiencing it. That's how I tend to push my belief behind it because I've experienced it. And what I've experienced is when I bring my breath down into my diaphragm, it pushes my intestines down, and I feel a pressure right in between, um, pretty much right in between the spot of my asshole and my testicles. Just because the breath is being pushed down on the inhale. And basically, what that does is it engages all of the quote unquote chakra points. But when I take a breath like that versus a breath where I feel like I'm anxious, or a breath where I feel like
Yeah,
I'm
the right breathing
feeling
can release muscle tension, and that changes your emotional mood.
yeah, so like, especially in today's I hate using the word society because it feels like such a general term. But in the way we're educated, the way we're inundated, and the way we're culturalized, it's a lot through the head and through the eyes. It's not necessarily through the body. We're sitting down all the time. When we sit down, it hardens up the muscles in the rib cage, the intercostals. We can't breathe fully. When we can't breathe fully, we don't get enough oxygen circulated through our body, not enough O2 into our cells, especially when we're running, or especially when we do activities where we breathe, we don't have a high enough VO2 max, which is the amount of oxygen our blood cells can carry, and that affects our brain, that affects our brain waves that we function at, like whatever frequency that our brain waves function at. And it all starts out with how we're physically put, the position that we're put into. And for me, I'm just like, man,
What is this you're talking about? By the
We're
way?
in.
Is it a
Could you
religion or
stop?
is
Wait,
it?
sorry. I need to.
No, it's
Could we
like
try and
it's
keep
like
points
we're in
concise?
this
I'm trying to follow
position,
him.
right? It's
trying to
like
Mr.
follow
Crypto
him.
Kim,
just
my
to
friend,
bring it
Mr.
back.
Crypto, I'm
Yeah,
gonna have
just
to.
wait, just to
No, can I
bring it
just say
back
one thing
full
before you
circle.
bring it back? I just need to say one thing.
Let me bring it back full circle
No,
back
my
to
friend,
the point that we were talking about. All right, and what I was saying is that we're in this point, we're already so unbalanced. When we come into this world, when we're born into this world, this is an unbalanced world that the term balance, 50 in the head, 50 in the body, is not so clear. That's
Okay.
true if we were coming from a standard point. If, like, let's say we're coming from an X and Y axis and we're starting at 0, 0, that's true. 50 in the head, 50 in the body. That would be correct in terms of how we elevate ourselves and live our lives to the fullest, quote unquote. But we don't. We don't start at that point. And
Is this
because
Buddhism?
no one knows what start we
Buddhism.
point.
So
No, it's
can I
not
just ask? I
Buddhism.
just need
It's
to
not.
say, wait,
It's
you
not
can stop,
Buddhism.
my friend.
I
My
thought
But
it
what
friend,
I'm
sounds
you
like
can,
saying
Muslim.
is because we don't know what point we start at, we don't know what point we should be at. Because let me just repeat that. Because we don't know what point we start at, we don't know what point we should be at. Which is why we're all here, and which is why we all have questions. I'm not saying I have the answers. I guess
Right,
this
okay.
is
I need to
just
ask. I need to
experience.
ask that you
Yeah.
keep your points like kind of more concise.
My
You need to
roots.
make sure that you try and say what you're saying in the least amount of words as possible, in order to ensure everyone gets a chance to speak. So, if anyone
Well, I
would
mean,
like to
for
address
me,
that,
it's just I'm thinking out loud, right? So it's like for me, it's just, I don't know what points I'm trying to make. So
yeah.
sometimes I'm thinking them through, and I think that's. I mean, this is why we're here, right? This is the whole point of
Okay,
this
that's
call, so
fine.
we
Yeah.
can think through points. Yeah, it's not about keeping them concise. I mean, this is not like a Fox interview show.
I
Right. Okay.
appreciate. I agree with trying to. That's kind of why I don't talk much, is because I'm kind of a slow talker, and I feel like I have a lot to offer, but I feel like I hesitate and talk slow. And
By all
there's
means, take your time.
someone here that are just very fast talkers and fast thinkers, and it's I identify with having a hard time keeping things concise.
I'm slow too.
Don't worry
I
about it,
love
guys.
this
We're
topic.
we're learning
concise.
I
together.
love this topic. Hey, can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Get back to can y'all hear me now?
Yeah, you're sounding great now.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, the back to Peterson. One of the really interesting things, part of his religious lecture, that it's been a long time since I've seen it, and it was like his account of the Genesis story. But this one thing always stuck with me, and it was the point about like freedom of speech and God bringing about the world through speech, right? So
Right.
he spoke and things manifested. He saw that this was good, and I just think it's a very interesting parallel between the foundation to free liberal societies and the foundation of the Christian worldview of everything else is undergirdled, underlined by speech, right? By correct, harmonious speech. And I think that's metaphorical. And then you can see the practical implications of that, because I would wager that most people in this room would not want to live in a country or society that does not have a freedom of speech standard, or freedom of the press. So that's just been a very interesting. That's just been a very interesting idea that stuck with me.
Yeah. So go on. You want to address that?
Me or?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would like to respond to that point again. Like, so see, that's where I get a little bit hesitant about the metaphysical connotations that come up in Jordan's work. It's it seems like you can almost translate the text in a sense when you're moving away into that territory, into any kind of metric that you want. So often, if he wants to make the point, freedom of speech is good.
Often good and evil are very conflated.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
would sort of use a prescriptive measure there and say, well, and what he does is he merges too many things that may not be directly in his scope of expertise, and often he does that with politics too. I think I agree with a lot of his political statements, but a lot of them come from. I actually find his pure psychology work a lot more interesting as far as individuals go, rather than this collective stuff that's going on, like where he's trying to merge politics with religion, and then religion, and he's trusted religion because obviously a lot of his audience is quite religious, or the people in the States are quite religious, and you're going to have that's kind of giving currency to a pretty blank claim, I think, like to say, because God spoke the word, therefore that's freedom, that's some legitimation for freedom of speech, or I mean, it seems like a massive projection.
Well,
Massive.
it's an interesting parallel, no?
Yeah, but
Yeah,
I mean,
because people in the
I mean,
past religiously they were
I mean,
intolerant to
I mean,
different views, and they were tolerant to outside views. So, like when you like connecting that with religion, in the past you get your head chopped off and burnt at the stake. So I don't
Nivek,
know.
I think the point that's
yeah,
trying to be made was
I
that
mean,
this was our former way of trying to understand freedom of speech through religious texts. Not necessarily the fact that we perfected it, but some would argue that this was one way of us demonstrating our understanding of freedom of speech in our primitive forms. How would you address that?
So
So
I would,
go
because
slowly there. You're
if I had
saying
to
that
if I had to make that point again, like I could make the reverse
Okay,
of
go on.
that point, so and support what Navek was saying, for example. So there's blasphemy laws also in the Bible, so I can say, well, see, this is clear doctrine of Marxist, measuring of freedom of thought. There's also verses in there that say that committing lust, thinking about through lustful eyes, is worse than actually committing adultery. So now that's thought policing. Then we go into 1984. So the God justifies thought police, and you can literally make any assertion you like, and it just happens that Jordan
yeah,
makes the liberal interpretations that
How would you address that, Zemo?
because religion was about upholding traditional
no,
norms in the past, where
yeah,
where people
Can we
not
let
being
Zemo
open to
address that?
outside.
Can we let Zemo address that?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I completely agree with that. Honestly, Sam Harris demonstrated this pretty well in the conversation. He said, I don't know if he did it in his book or it was one of the podcasts that they did together before the Pangburn speeches, and he said, "Oh, I went into the cookbook section and I just closed my eyes and ran my fingers along a book, and bam, just random cooking book. Right, opened it up, random recipe." And he went through the ingredients, and then he added this extra meaning to the ingredients. So like salt and pepper, we see the prescription for salt and pepper. Salt and pepper is indicative of the binary, of the dichotomy of Taoism, of the yin and the yang. And then we want salt, which is like an adventure, right? It adds a little extra flavor, and diced pineapples, and just he just went down the list, and he's like, you can literally do this with anything. And I thought that was a knockout argument towards Peterson, because he does do this a lot. It's called concretism, where you kind of make these metaphorical deep statements, but it's actually really easy to make if you just stick to narratives and things that resonate with humans. Now, the reason he does these all the time, but the reason this one stuck with me is because I think there is something. I don't think there's something to all of them, but I think there is a little bit something to this one, right? And Jordan is one of these people that thinks Western society is undergirdled by Christianity, which I don't necessarily buy, but it's kind of a nexus of his political views, his religious views, and a little bit of his clinical work, I suppose. So, anyways, yeah, that's what I got.
Right. Okay. So we're all in agreement then.
The advance of Western society was held back by Christianity, and people who were like with the free speech, traditional people who thought differently and were open to outside views. Religion would be more against that, in order to not have people's minds not change, to uphold traditional norms.
Do you not think there's some utility in upholding traditional norms?
I think with the stories, and you can make a bunch of stories arguments, a metaphor, a parable in the mouth of a fool is not the same as a parable in the mouth of a wise person. And that you can, if you know what you're talking about, you can make some solid knockout punches to get a message across if you know how to use those metaphors.
Yeah,
I mean, true.
I'd have to
It's like a foolish metaphor doesn't walk as well.
Yeah,
Sure,
I'd have
sure,
to
but
agree with neurotic shrimp in that statement. I feel like when you make the point that Jordan Peterson states metaphors that a lot of other people can make, yeah, a lot of people could make those same metaphors because there are stories, and a lot of those stories aren't interpreted as metaphors. I think where he exceeds is his insight into those metaphors and the claims that he comes up with. I think he definitely stood his ground, and I think he can definitely use a little less word salad I think he can use smaller words, or more, because I mean, Sam Harris does a really good job in laying out complicated ideas simply. I think that's where a lot of his appeal is. He uses a lot of analogies, which is very, very appealing. I think with Jordan Peterson, he doesn't do that well. And I think if he was able to do that better, he would have. I think maybe he would have a solid grounding point in where he's coming from. But I think if someone is actually willing to pay attention to the words that he's saying, I think he brings a lot of solid value. I think even in terms of his Jungian position, yeah, he brings legitimate points in terms of supporting those stories that he does advocate for.
I'm not sure, but I'm not
from
following
a
the
Jungian
stories.
I think from the
I
Jungian
agree.
perspective, that makes the
But,
Jungian perspective makes sense in my opinion. But when you're getting into like, you know, sort of saying, like, you know, when you ask him a question, let's say you have a one-on-one interview with him, and you ask him a question, you know, is Jesus the Son of God? And he says, well, it depends what you mean by that question, because if it was taken in this, it's like that's where you're sort of getting into. It doesn't just feel like a word salad, but it actually feels a little bit disingenuous when you sort of go, well, you know, if somebody asks you what your name is, and you say, well, you know, labels are things that come from human constructs, and naming languages just depends on what you mean. Are you asking me about my name? Are you talking about
He's
how I'm
trying to
labeled as a
obfuscate.
collect? Yeah, it feels a little bit like, you know, well,
He's trying to
dude,
muddle things.
yeah, like what is this?
Yeah.
Where is this getting us? You know, you're not sort of, the question is not phrased in that way, and it's I think it's clear to the audience, it's clear to the interviewer, and that's why Dillahunty got really cut up with him. Which, I mean, I wasn't that happy with Dillahunty either, because he should have known Jordan's famous for the word salad.
He's straddling the fence, is what he's doing. You're trying
I
to
just
find
think
out
he
what
doesn't
side he more
know.
leans on.
I just think
I
he doesn't
honestly,
know.
I don't think that Jordan
I think
Peterson.
We're
when
going
I
out of time,
watch
guys. We're
him, at
going out
least
of time.
when I watch him, I think when I watch him, it seems like he's really thinking through what he's saying. And when he's asked a question like, do you really believe that Jesus rose from the dead? He really just doesn't know. That's why he's unable to answer those questions, because he's not a Christian in the sense that he's not a Protestant Christian.
Yeah, sure.
I think
He's saying it doesn't
And then I
matter.
think
He's
that
saying
answer
no,
could
I
have been,
think
then that
I think
answer
he
could
just
just be
doesn't
no.
know. I think he just does not know. He just has not come up with a solid enough point to be like, I am this. He just does
Maybe the
not
coming
know.
back from the
And
dead
I
is a
think
much more metaphorical
Could we let,
point,
you
where
want
you
to
your
trim-
ego
type of
death and you
person.
transform more readily all the
Yeah,
time.
I
and
mean,
it's just
I
an
just
instant
think
ego
he's the
death
type of
transforming.
I think he's the type of person to say that just like I just don't know. I think he is that type of person based on the
Yeah,
thousands and
I
thousands
mean,
of videos that he's
sure.
released.
Sure, you can
but
say, look, I don't know, but I
but
think he sort of says, I don't know, but then, you know, depends on how you phrase it. I mean, I don't think he knows the answer in any way the question's phrased anyway. So if we're
it
going to
looks
make
like he's running. Is to me, he looks like he's running.
like, you know, like,
I-
No,
I
I think
totally
no,
disagree.
no, I really
Oh, all right,
don't.
here.
I really don't. I think he says I don't know, and then he's posting reasons why he should know and why he shouldn't know, and he's stuck between those reasons, and then he's saying I don't know. I think that's what he's
you figure
doing.
this shit out. Like, if you, you know, if you're making a grand claim, like, you know, that, that, you know,
Well,
the
not
Greek
when it's
gods are
something that's been
emotions.
argued. Not when it's something
Could we
that's
let, could
been
we let
argued
Pangburn
for
get in?
tens
Could we
of
let Pangburn
thousands
get
of
in?
years.
Guys,
Especially when you're
JP,
asking questions that have been asked for tens of thousands of years. I mean,
J-
you know, there's no way I would
when you
expect him to know.
when
No,
you
but
when,
his own
when you
position. I mean, I'm not talking about an ontological claim. I'm just saying his own claim. So, you know, if somebody asked him what is his name, and he'd be like, well, it depends on what you ask me my name is. I mean, it's like, okay, the whole process is, you know, we work on the human constructs, but I think people are well clear when they ask you what your name is and do you believe in, you know, the basic Christian
see,
tenets that, you know,
Well,
it's a belief.
I think he just doesn't.
I would
I
actually
just
say that that's his strong point
he's
because
flip-flopping.
he is very, very specific with his words. He will be very, very specific with his words. I think that's a strong point, man, because he's not making any large claims. He's very, very specific in the claims that he does make, which is exactly why I would support him because he's not saying that he's not a
well,
Christian
no,
or a
well,
Christian
hold
just
on,
based on the way he
because
phrases with his words and diction.
hold on,
I
but
think,
he does make pretty large claims, right? I mean, for example, the one that sticks out is like, you know, atheists aren't really atheists. You know, and you know, this is just patently absurd. I mean, you know, it's like me telling him you're not really a Christian. You know, but honestly, I see a lot of it his divergent from specific details. It's a few different things. I think it's a little bit of intellectual narcissism, quite frankly. I think he gets a kick out of being, the smartest sounding, smartest guy in the room, smartest sounding guy in the room. And, I can't fault him for that. I like that.
I
mean,
too. I think you guys just don't understand him.
I think it's just like I don't know.
Nobody's explaining him.
Very, I think it's very interesting.
No one's explaining him.
I think it's very interesting.
I mean, we're all talking over each other.
Yeah.
Could all go one at a time?
Yeah, to make my point. Yeah. I just think what's very.
JP
I think
has that effect.
Super funny.
Nivic, could we go one at a time?
Super interesting. Hey, come on, guys. I just want to make my point. My point is that I think what is very interesting is that for me, I thought Sam Harris was the one who was very intellectually narcissistic, and he sounded very pompous and like kind of above it all, and not necessarily.
You actually can't do that without assuming. If you're assuming yourself, you're doing that.
Let me finish my point. What I think is interesting is even though I thought that, there are other people that thought Jordan Peterson was the one who did that. And for me, it was just like, what? Like, for me, I would never think that. But it's like to actually hear that there are people that Jordan Peterson thought was the one who did that.
Can we let Zemo get on that? Can we let Zemo respond to that?
And then whoever next is fine. But, I mean, I was where you once were. Not saying, I've learned to be smarter than you or anything like that. But, I mean, I've watched those debates a good amount of times, and there's been times where I've been more on Peterson's side and more on Sam Harris's side, and I've kind of gone through an evolution because they're very interesting talks, and they're some of the most sophisticated atheist Christian talks you'll ever come across. And I think you're underestimating.
Hold up though. You said.
Wait, could we finish?
Let me respond to that. Let me respond.
I'm not done.
Guys, we need to go one at a time. Guys, we need to go one at a time. Let Zemo finish.
Let me just respond
I wasn't
to that. What I was
brother.
I will stop muting people.
Let me ask you a question though.
Okay, Mr. Crypto, I'm gonna mute you if you don't stop talking.
Yeah. What was? I just wanted to ask you a question.
No, just let him finish. Let him finish.
I mean,
hang on. Just because you've
been talking a lot, brother.
Just wait. Just because you have a point to make here, it doesn't mean that it's your turn, right?
Are you talking to me?
Everyone. So just wait your turn, and like ZMO wasn't even done. And if you have a point to make, that doesn't.
Okay, so you are talking to me.
You should interject. And no, I'm talking to the room. I'll tell you if I'm talking to you. But if let ZMO finish, and you can still make your point, or issue a challenge. Let's just take turns here.
Okay, I mean, a lot of people were interrupting me, so I guess it was okay.
Yeah, but I mean,
it's snowball.
I suppose you don't subscribe to I for an I morality. Let's just follow the rules.
No, I was just subscribing to the environment of the room. I guess that's just what I was doing.
Yeah,
here.
We gotta take the rules and listen.
He said he was talking to everybody.
Ziyaad is moderating. So ZMO, finish the point you were making.
I was just saying I've been on both sides of it, and honestly, from my watching those debates, honestly, I think Jordan was very slippery on some points. Quite honestly, about he asked him, "Do you think Jesus Christ rose from the dead? Yes or no?" And he went around kind of roundabout, and Sam goes, "How's this for an answer?" Almost certainly not. It's 3 words. It's not that hard, and I think he doesn't want to say it. And I'm totally charitable towards Peterson. I think he's an amazing intellectual, and I think there are also very valid critiques to make of him. And but yeah, I mean, it's 3 simple words, and I think he doesn't want to lose a lot of his audience. I think this was demonstrated when he made when the Kavanaugh hearing was happening, the Supreme Court judge to confirm him. He made a few statements like, "Yeah, I'm not so sure about this guy," and he had major backlash on the internet, and then he retracted his statement. So I think he's afraid of pissing off his fans, honestly. And I'm done.
That's my issue with him. It seems like he's just disingenuous.
Well, I think more than from my perspective, it's not really the fact he's necessarily being disingenuous. It's just I think he understands what the questioner is asking, and I think he's trying to implement a lot of things there which are genuine. They're coming from a genuine place. He's obviously Jungian, but I just think when you're in a debate space, he could do probably better. So I'm not going to make like a ethical claim that he's a charlatan or something like that. But it's I just thought it would be more clear to someone of his standing that, you know, when somebody asks you if you're a Christian, it'd be pretty straightforward of what they're talking about. And, you know, if they said someone rose from the dead, I think it would be, you know, it doesn't need to be as convoluted as it.
He has a 1 hour long video on the death of Christ, but like, who wants to watch a 1 hour long video?
He's got like that's the thing. He's got videos like 3 hours. Like, man.
I think
why is that a bad thing?
I'd like to watch it. I don't mind watching it.
Yeah, why
are you guys talking about Jordan Peterson?
3-hour video.
Yeah, we're talking about Jordan Peterson. Do you want to say anything? Do you have any thoughts?
His video on the resurrection.
I linked specifically the death and resurrection of Christ.
His video on the resurrection.
Can we let Villain get in? Can we let Villain get in, guys? We need to. Guys, we're not time. Yeah, we need to let Villain get in.
If you guys haven't watched the Jordan Peterson's resurrection video, it's very, very deep and very honest. I found it very, very valuable.
And to add on to that, I think I would be even more cautious if he had a 5-minute video on the resurrection or death of Jesus Christ versus an hour-long video.
Why is that?
I feel like
because someone who tries to go ahead and consolidate the death and rise of Jesus Christ, which has been debated for thousands of years, into a 5-minute video is obviously not going to have as much information as an hour-long video.
You're not supposed to put words to God.
The thing about it is, like, if you just have a point, I like videos where a person have a point about something and they just make a quick point and you can address the point. I don't want to address a million points. You know what I mean?
Well, I want to know the reason behind that point, and sometimes there are a lot of reasons that come behind the reasons behind the point, and it's not so simple as, oh, it's a point.
I think.
But do you think there's a need to complicate it? Because for such a topic of such weight, do you think there's a need to complicate it?
He does overcomplicate things. But what I would say is I would be much more weary, even for anything that's worth talking about. I will be much more weary of seeing like a 3-minute video versus like a 15-minute video. And
because
especially
a 3-minute video,
you can debunk straightforward. Especially if we're talking about things that have been talked about for thousands of years that people have disagreed upon, then yeah, I would be much, much more weary of seeing like a 3-minute video versus an hour-long video. Because it's not like we're gonna have the answers. People have been arguing this for like thousands of years.
You can debunk a 3-minute video real quick, but if it's a long video, it's more absolute. You know, it's more convoluted. You can't address one point. You know, like a lot of people make short videos.
Dude, anything worth talking about or anything that's worth doing takes time.
Yeah, sure. But what I was going to say in that situation is,
like, you can't watch
if you're talking about the concept being well explored. I think you explore both opposition and affirmation to that position. But he never does that. So he will sort of make these claims like, see, Bible is a libertarian document because, you know, it talks about freedom of speech of God or something. But, you know, if I thought he was being sort of to the point in that situation, you'd also mention the verses which sound anti-libertarian, more theocratic or more autocratic, as God as the dictator, and that nuance isn't there. I think when you're talking about these points and you're taking so much time, I think you should explore both counter positions to your points. So, you know, if you're going to say, well, the Bible says this, but then the Bible also says this in other parts. So because otherwise, then
he does do that. He does do that. He definitely does do that.
Do you have an example?
He says that, yeah.
Well, in any of his lectures that are on YouTube, I mean, he points the counter argument and then he points to the argument.
Oh no, of him,
I think for anyone to be like, oh, you know what, the death of for Jordan Peterson to talk about the death of Jesus Christ in an hour and to critique that and to say that something would be better consolidated into 3 minutes and to say that, oh, just because I watched this 3-minute video, I have this total knowledge. That's so. I just don't.
The critique.
Can I comment on this?
I'm talking about this.
Yeah, go on. Let him comment.
Okay, I feel like this is kind of an issue with the atheist community. I feel like sometimes the atheist community tries to push to turn like everything into objective truth and objective reality, right? So, it's like you want to argue that like, oh, okay, so this is an objective truth. H2O is H2O. End of discussion. And then people act like Jordan Peterson wants to be like, well, it depends on what you mean by H2O. And it's like, maybe it feels like that to you because you want to turn everything into objective truth. But, Jordan Peterson's strength is subjectivity. And he tries to spend the time to create these analogies that everyone can agree upon. And he tries to make an argument that a lot more of our truth and our reality is based on subjectivity.
I agree, and I find that the people that are trying to flatten Jordan Peterson's language down into something concrete and black and white, which is not how human language works, I find them to be hypocritical, because the atheists do the same thing that you guys are critiquing Jordan Peterson for doing when the discussion on meaning comes up, and they try to get you to put a finite, concrete definition of meaning. Or the discussion can't go forward.
And especially, I think if you're going to try to use the length of time that someone talks about a topic that's been talked about for over thousands of years to try to discredit them, I think that's a big
I agree.
no-no.
No offense, Nivik, but you're making the argument that it's too much work for you to sort through the information. You want to like a soundbite or a tweet that you can easily crush.
I think the critique there is that it's a yes/no question whether or not these things are true or false. So the fact that he's making a 1 hour long video and that's the only source of information available, it kind of shades some doubt.
You're flattening a complex idea down into something that's two-dimensional and black and white. It's not just a yes/no question. I don't know is my answer to that question. I don't know.
Oh well, I don't know. It's a pretty small answer too. I mean, that
when you dive into philosophy and like religion, you're trying to answer the most deep questions, and like
yes,
that's what religious people were trying to do. They're trying to answer the most deep questions, and that's not an easy thing to do. It's not like you just have the 5-second answer. We're done our work here. Bye.
I also see Jordan.
So then,
Peterson
no. I mean, but like neurotic shrimp. Like, why would you critique Jordan Peterson then on making an hour-long video on the death of Jesus Christ?
I didn't intend to critique him. I would make the point that he spent an hour, which is a long time, to discuss the idea. So it's unfair to make him give a 10-word answer. It's kind of where I would stand, actually.
Okay, so then what I would ask? So then what I would ask is, why is an hour a long time to you when that same exact question has been discussed for thousands of years?
I mean, I suppose it's relative. Like an hour is a long time for like a person that's on.
Oh, but
Snapchat all the time.
If I can just jump in there.
One at a time, guys. One at a time.
If I can jump in there.
What's the significance of the length of time an idea has been wrestled with?
Because some
it's not necessarily causative.
Some ideas take more time to unpack than others.
So really? Because it only took me till age 12 when I first heard about some radical beliefs people hold about reality to be like, wow, we've been pontificating about this for this long? That's retarded.
It's not necessarily causal, but maybe the longest lasting things are the best ones.
Question. How long do you have to boil an egg to poach it?
I don't know off the top of my head. I don't poach eggs.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's 7 minutes on medium-high heat. 7 minutes on medium-high heat. Okay, that was about like 3 seconds for me to answer that question. Okay, a much more difficult question is, did Jesus come back to life? It's going to take a lot longer than 3.5 seconds, my friend.
Why do you think that's a difficult question? Yeah,
okay, why do you think
the answer is it's a metaphor for ego death that humans go through.
It is by your own subjective perspective, but I don't see that as this great, like, because someone else mentioned before, like.
Okay, so but here's the thing. It's like we have been discussing
ego death.
Stop interrupting. Here's the thing.
But my point is that let me just make a point. My point is that we've been discussing this. Like we've been
Yeah. Yeah. So, Kim, this is your second warning for interrupting people. Stop doing it. Someone was mentioning, these are the deepest ideas that humanity has ever wrestled with. Deep by what metric exactly? I don't find these things to be the deepest ideas that we've wrestled with.
What's
I
your
find
estimate on
the
ego
ideas.
and the patterns
I
that
find
humans
the
go through?
ideas of better ways to rear children, like specifics, health, things like that, to be much deeper. If we want to use deep as a
What say you on ego death?
Can I
How
ask
about
a
deep?
question? Are you
How about
saying
deep
that the
into
ideas of
society?
God is not deep? Like the idea of God is not deep at all?
Everything's been
It's
around for thousands of years. That's what
absolutely
he's
not
saying.
deep at all to me.
You
So
can
I
make
have to
anything,
ask you
and
something. What
technically
about
everything
these
is
guys
deep.
like Spinoza, Voltaire, Nietzsche, all these people talking about God from
Yeah, they're
such a long
pontificating
time?
on a
Are you?
simple problem. They're
I mean, you
pontificating on
see it
simple
as a
problem.
simple problem, but do you not
Yeah,
think you're being egocentric in this particular aspect? As this is a
not at all.
metaphysical question, and there
Because
are
when I'm
some limits
outside,
to your knowledge, and you're
well,
thinking that if you know a certain amount of things, you think that you're knowing more than you actually do, and you're saying these things are
no, I
simple.
haven't claimed. I haven't claimed any. I
I want
haven't
to
made
ask
any
you a deep
knowledge
question.
claims with regards to God yet. So it's people think these are deep things because people have pontificated on them for so long, and great
I want to ask you a
authors
deep
and
question.
writers have thought about these things for so long. But I just think that's just noise, man. That's subjective cultural noise, and I've never found any of these ideas about God and the necessity of some kind of religious structure compelling by one iota. Not at all.
Travis, but
I
you can't
find him
make
to
it. You
be.
can't say that
I
in a
find him
short
to be
sentence,
very
Travis.
deep,
You
complex,
need
and
4 hours
compelling.
to explain that, Travis. So in order for us to, because that's that deep. So just talk for 4 hours, and
No,
then
I'm not saying you need
you'd
to
have more
talk for four
validity
hours.
to your statement, Travis.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
not
but
saying that. I'm
I
just
think
saying that these
go on,
ideas
talk
are
for 4 hours, and then
metaphysical.
when you're
Wait,
done,
let him
then
talk. Let him talk. Let him talk. Let him talk.
I'm just saying that these ideas have been talked about for a long time
okay.
by people, okay? And I'm not saying they were wrong or right. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe in this particular time we have the truth, and what you're saying is true, right? But we have to still consider that we don't know a lot about this universe. We're still
Okay.
thinking with causality, right? Our brain is wired to it. We can't think beyond causality. But there are questions about human existence that are
what are you
simply
talking
not
about, man?
solvable. Okay, I'll
We
be
can't
honest.
think beyond causality. We use our imaginations to create stories
Uh-huh.
all the time that have fuck all to do with reality. Like you can literally imagine anything, right?
I mean, you can imagine things, but still based on something, right? I mean, it's still based on something that has preceded it.
Like
There are
what?
structures, shapes. Okay,
So
okay.
you do you
I'm
not think you can imagine things that do you not think when Einstein imagined
imagine something that
general
doesn't have
relativity
anything to
that
do with anything else.
hang on when he imagined general relativity, he had to imagine the artistic concept and how that would look, like how that would map onto his equations. This
Okay,
isn't
first of all, he didn't
like the
imagine
original
relativity.
ideas.
Relativity
Original
was
ideas,
derived
man.
from Lagrange's theorem. Lagrange's, if you have done the mathematics of special relativity, you would have known and you wouldn't have said that because it used the
Yeah, you
pre-existing
didn't hear what I
mathematical
said.
principles.
You're trying
Uh,
to present a piece of knowledge,
uh-huh.
something that you know about general relativity that had nothing to do with what I said. I'm talking about how
Okay.
Einstein was able to picture how general relativity looked. I'm talking about the imagery of the equation.
Okay, those concepts
And
already existed. Yeah.
so what
He,
you but what you responded with was a non sequitur because you weren't listening, man.
Okay, I
I
listen
want to
to you,
joust
man.
with Pangburn.
But if you would let me express myself, I would tell you that what he imagined was based on the principles of mathematics and what those equations were particular. For example, let's say string theory, right?
That's
There
exactly
was
what I
this,
just said. That's exactly
and
what I
then
just said.
that's based on causality because first things exist and then he imagined something based on that thing. You imagine something, it has shape, it has color, it has all these preconceiving notions, and that's what causality is. When you think, I mean, Kant said this in his critique of pure reason. He said a human cannot think beyond time, space, and causality.
These are modes of thinking. You can't just
and to present that, to make that claim that we can't do that, he cannot demonstrate that. That's a bullshit claim to make.
I mean, okay, you can say it's a bullshit claim, but when we talk about, like, let's just take science, right? When we talk about the start of the universe, we cannot perceive something that doesn't have a cause. Example, it's self-causal.
Bullshit.
Okay, you can perceive something that is self-causal.
Yes, I can perceive of an infinite state of potential.
You have not seen the Big Bang, sir.
Virtual particles can pop in and out of existence, and that
You have not seen the Big Bang.
Always is.
Oh, okay. See, I know all the scientific lingo. I'm a STEM graduate. I understand that.
Sure.
But here's the thing. I'm just saying that when you're talking about these particles of, these positrons and whatever, I'm just saying these come out of nothingness, right? That's what we say. But how does nothingness have that energy? Can you explain to me that?
It's not absolute nothing. Let me clarify this for you. This is I don't know where you are in schooling, but you will probably get to this.
No, I'm done with schooling.
When we're talking about pre-Big Bang nothing, we're not talking about absolute nothing. We're talking about a whole lot of fucking stuff going on in,
Tell me that stuff.
whether you want to call it 11-dimensional hyperspace or whatnot. Virtual particles.
No one says that. Show me one theory that says that.
Pre-Big Bang quantum fluctuations.
Okay, tell me what a quantum fluctuation is.
That's one of the propositions
Tell
about
me what a quantum fluctuation.
I'm not saying that it's been demonstrated, but pre-Big Bang quantum fluctuations, we think that before the Big Bang, that there were virtual particles popping in and out of existence, and in some circumstances when this happens, Big Bangs can happen.
Okay, here's the thing. First of all, you said before the Big Bang. Well, yes. Scientists say time starts from Big Bang, so there's nothing like before the Big Bang. Before is a concept that depends on time.
When Stephen Hawking is talking about that time, he's talking about the time within our closed system. He's not talking about the macro time in which all change has ever occurred. That's not what he's talking about.
Then you're still saying
it's a useless platitude to say that, like, well, nothing before because time couldn't have existed because Stephen Hawking has shown that time itself, time and space came into existence at the moment of the Big Bang. That's just within our closed system, brother.
Okay, let's consider your closed system, brother. And I'm just saying, in that closed system, those particles exist. And I'm asking you what quantum fluctuation is. And if you knew it's literally just energy. Okay? And I'm just saying...
It's described, like Lawrence Krauss will describe it as virtual particles. Right?
And if everything that we perceive in this universe depends on something else, because almost every single thing around you depends on something else, then why does this one thing that we actually don't know really about, it's just mathematical fantasy right now, but why does this one thing doesn't depend on anything else before that? Tell me, if you can explain that to me.
It's not that it doesn't depend on anything. It's like if you can imagine just this map that is like the infinite thing is just a state of potential for something to happen, right? That's all it is. And within that state of potential for something to happen, there are different processes that can happen and from a probabilistic perspective do happen sometimes. That's all that's being proposed. And of course we don't know, like, I'm not saying we know this for certain. It's just
and then it becomes a deep question.
I think in chemistry class that talks about
prove my point.
Virtual particles
everything you imagine
with energy.
You literally proved my point right now, that you just said we don't know, and that makes it a deeper question. That makes it a deep question. The question of existence is a deep question. The question of existence being dependent on something is a deep question. That's what we were trying to prove in the beginning,
Pangburn,
and you just proved it.
Is that we have these elaborate causal structures that we build up, and so we build up these huge structures. But I want to know, relating to ego death, is it ever the case that you build up this huge structure for yourself, and then you have to let that go and give it up because it's completely wrong and baseless?
You mean like as a human being, like as a thinking entity?
Yeah, do human beings kind of build up these causal structures that are very, very nicely detailed and do great, but at some point it's actually not satisfactory, not good enough, and you have to let it go and ego death?
Like there are some things about reality that, for instance, if we if we tried to step out of the illusion of free will and just all of a sudden we were successful in it and we were just like stuck in this deterministic biological form that's just forcing us to do things, if we were able to get to that point psychologically,
I don't believe in determinism because it's terrible implications.
That sounds like a very terrifying existence, right?
So my point is relating to ego death, in that there's a very deep thing that humans are doing, in that they're trying to build these very elaborate causal structures, but you have to let go of sometimes the most important thing to you, which might be this very structure, because your ego might have to die, and that's a very deep pattern that actually happens iteratively for humans.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
Kim's
there's
just
a good.
texting me saying to unmute himself.
Who's muted? Sorry.
Kim.
He's
muted.
I thought I unmuted him. Oh, sorry, I thought I unmuted him.
I still want to keep this going with you.
I'm gonna. I got to mute for a second here. I'm just lugging some boxes, but I'll be listening.
I want just with you though. I want you to answer some questions for me. Otherwise, I'm going to feel not very satisfied with your explanation.
We'll push back for a few minutes. When he's back, you can ask him those questions. Yeah.
I'm going to just feel like you're engaged in bad faith.
I want to make a correlation here. That those are claiming that the question of the Christ or the question of theism or that kind of stuff is just simple and outdated, and it's just it can be boiled down to a yes or no answer. In the scientific world, I think a comparable correlation would be the light particle wave duality, and to ask a scientist to give a yes or no answer to is light a particle or a wave is comparable to asking a religious person deep questions about meaning and the I don't know, form of God or the Godhead.
Yeah, and just to add on to that,
well, technically everything is deep. Everything has a cause and effect that goes back for forever. So you can
not everything is deep. That's a leftist tactic to where you blur things to where everything means everything.
Everything's deep, so I'm going to look.
I don't necessily agree with like. I don't necessarily.
You can talk about in a deep way.
Can I speak? Because I've been muted. I don't necessarily agree. Like, that's a leftist tactic. I don't agree. Like, oh, that's a leftist tactic. I do think that every single extra second that we do spend talking about the death of Christ proves the point that it does take a lot of time to be able to come up with a claim of whether the death of Christ
I could do the same with crap.
Is substantiated. Yeah, exactly. So what I'm saying is, you can go ahead and say that the same thing as crap is whatever you want to talk about crap and however you want to talk about it and whatever position you want to take. Yeah, it takes more time than others. So, for example, you could talk about how long does it take for crap to come out of the digestive system? Well, that answer depends. That answer depends on your diet. That answer depends on how long your intestinal tract is, because it's different based on people of height. Okay, but if you talk about colors,
what's it made of, and the acidity and the food,
then it's like it's a little bit more easier to answer. So what I'm saying is like, you try to use crap as like a kind of like oh yeah, you could try to use it, but what I'm saying is dude, it's very obvious that some questions take longer to answer than others, especially this question that has been debated for millions of hours.
Things get very complicated. When you talk about imaginary particles, you have like A makes C, and then you have to propose electron state B as the only intermediate, and it's like an imaginary state. It's infinitely high energy, but it's the only way that you can really propose the mechanism goes through. And so we do stuff like that. It does get very complicated. I want to say people sometimes say it's complicated as a way for them to not dive into the complicatedness, and I feel like that's a cop-out. I think you have to actively engage into the complicatedness. No, it's not.
Okay, so what I'm saying,
and I'm going to go play D&D and Slay Dragons elsewhere. So I had a very nice talk. I'll have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Oh, take care, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
Take care. And just to add on to anyone that adds on, like to the deepnessness, like it takes more time. Whatever, regardless of whatever option any person takes, it takes more time. If you want to dive into the deepness, it takes more time.
We let Doc say.
So that explains JP talking forever on stage, right?
It takes more time because you're confused by what's being presented, I think. Like, it only takes more time if you look at this as a big, deep mystery that needs to be understood and solved and debated about. That's the only reason why it seems so deep. For me, this whole issue of gods is just a ridiculous waste of fucking time, because humanity happened to create these things, these imaginary things, instead of creating more, artistic storytelling that they didn't have to buy into, like, the reality of an afterlife and all that crap.
I would love to comment on this.
Can I?
Sure, man.
Okay. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so we can always choose to engage in a subject or not, right? And so, if a subject is deep to us, we can choose to engage in it. And if you think that something is retarded, if you think that, some subject is shallow and retarded, but it runs deeply in society, right? So there's a huge amount of people that subscribe to this. And I feel like, atheists make a big mistake by just turning away from these ideas that we think are retarded and just saying they're a waste of time. And if we want society to evolve, we need to engage in these conversations. And in order to engage properly, we have to put time and energy to understand why this is so deeply ingrained in our society. And we have to do it in an empathetic way by being like, you know what? I understand on all
because
these
of the mental gap.
levels.
And
it's like Pangburn.
Maybe
Pangburn.
here is
knowledge
somewhere
gap
that you don't see. And that's how we shift, is by like
it's like Pangburn.
getting
Pangburn.
nuance.
People make up gods because of
Keith, I appreciate the importance of having these conversations for the reasons that you just outlined, but that doesn't make the concepts discussed any more deep. I just see it as like this brain bug that we are slowly shaking off as we move along. Like, we're becoming more secular.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's no one who's going to disagree with that.
Can I ask you a question?
And look, I'm glad to see that. And that's why I spend time talking about this, because I don't want parents to infect their kids with ideas like they need to believe in an afterlife. They need to believe in some kind of like telling their little girl that like, okay, when you get older and you reach the teenage years, it would be unwomanly of you to explore your body and to engage in masturbation or anything like that, or telling that to kids. Like, I find this very abusive, and I think it's born out of these ancient doctrines that some people have a hard time shaking.
Let me respond.
I'm totally on board with that, by the way.
What you're saying.
But I think
so if you go to a parent...
Can I just comment really quick on what Pangburn just said?
Well,
okay.
Go ahead.
The fatal flaw in what you're saying is that you're synonymizing religion with some type of bug, or in other words, like, religion is error. It's wrong. It's a mistake. And that's where you shot yourself in the foot. Because from an evolutionary lens, religions are clearly ideas that were selected for based off their utility in aiding our survival. It's no accident.
Yeah, I wasn't talking through that lens.
The evolutionary chain, right?
John. Yeah, I wasn't talking through that lens. I'm talking from an epistemological lens.
Well, I'd imagine to most atheists, evolutionary theory is extremely influential and convincing.
Did you hear what I just said? I'm not talking through that lens. I agree with you on that. I'm talking through an epistemological standard of knowledge.
No.
Can I respond to this?
I'm going to ask one question to all these people who think that religion has utility. I'm just going to say, do you think that religious dogmatism has utility? Because I think Pangburn is supposedly opposing the dogma aspect of religion that tells you to do certain things and not do certain things.
Well, the major lesson we've
yourself.
learned, right, is that the only thing that might be worse than religion is lack of religion, because people just replace religion with dogma, secular dogma.
Don't.
Like whether it's critical race theory, literally entire theoretical frameworks, right?
I think that's a jump.
Sciences.
Yeah, because they lack knowledge and understanding of things, so they just make up shit.
So I went to I have the conflict between faith and reason pretty hard. I don't think either side should be cast out. I don't like the people that pick a side in that thing. I think it's a duality. Last night I went to a Greek Orthodox Christian service, and it was the most liturgical religious service I'd ever been to.
What's that mean?
That means
Liturgical.
liturgical means everything's like formalized, like it's all ritual. That everything is mechanical, and it's not like a Protestant Christian service where it's like a sermon and it's a conversation and there's music and it's free formed. It's like we're gonna do the incense now. We're gonna walk clockwise around the room. We're gonna light these candles. We're gonna say these things. We're gonna stand up. We're gonna sit down. That's what liturgical means. Liturgy. It's like
Can we?
very formal and mechanically. So when I was there, I found it very weird, and I was having a hard time finding value in it. But and give me just 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then I'll shut up. I know I'm going to be long-winded here, and I don't want to steal the stage. But years and years ago, I went to another liturgical form of Christianity. It was a Lutheran church. I was working in the oil field of North Dakota, and the winters there are like 8 to 10 months long, just like frozen wasteland, and it's very miserable. And it was miserable working on the oil field because it's like 50 guys to every 2 or 1 woman in that area, and you're just with rough guys all the time. Anyways, I was very depressed. I went to a Lutheran church, and I have a hard time with liturgical services. The Lutheran church that I went to, it's like the formal, it's kind of like a Catholic service. You sit in a pew, they tell you to stand up and then sit down. They read a word, then you stand up and sit down, and then they like sing a very weirdly monotone hymn, and then you stand up, sit down. It's very, very formal and mechanical. But in that moment, I understood. I could see a value in it. I could see that these people that come here every Sunday and do the same thing, like kind of like muscle memory or even like psyche memory, and they say the same things, they do the same rituals every Sunday. It kind of like snaps their psyche back to the focus. No matter how bad that environment is, no matter what's going on in their life, they have a day of a week where they go in and they focus on their beliefs and the belief in their afterlife and that kind of thing. And I could kind of see the value of it in like a psychological health thing. And then to tie that back in, I went to the Orthodox church last night that was even more liturgical. And I found it very strange, and I was having a hard time finding value in it. And I try to see everything from the other person's perspective so that I can understand it better. And what struck me as a possible way to understand that is like looking at like the ritual reality of physical workout. And it doesn't make sense why you're going to like lay on the floor in a plank and then push your body up and then go back to the floor and then push your body up and then go back to the floor like 63 times in a row. Like it just seems like ritualistic and stupid and weird, but that's called a push-up. And when you do a bunch of them, it actually strengthens your physical body. And you do other things that are ritualistic, like you grab a dumbbell and pull it up to your shoulder and put it down to your side and pull it up to your shoulder, and it's ritualistic. And so I think there's possibly, and I'm just saying this is the way I'm trying to look at it. I'm trying to see why these people see value in these weird ritualistic, dogmatic, liturgical ceremonies. And
Yeah,
I think it's reasonable that there might be a spiritual value, like exercising.
I have a question for you, Villain.
Villain,
If there's
I
a
agree.
boss,
That's my point of view. I don't know if that's true
Yeah,
or
I just
not,
want to say
but
something
that's how
first,
I'm trying to
Stark, and
see
then
it.
I'll
okay, I'll let you. I'll let Peck
shut up.
talk.
Yeah,
Sure.
I just wanted to say, Bill, and I agree with you in so many of the things you were just talking about. These rituals, like for me, mine would be like sitting down at the piano, engaging in mindfulness meditation, like, and some of the places I go in my mindfulness meditation seem like just absurd. Like it's just riddled with absurdism. And I think these are important. You know, I would disagree with some of the rituals I see human beings engaging with, and I would just say, like, I just want to be sure that there's nothing that is going to cause any harm to the individual. And I guess, like, I mean, like in some cultures, people will do that. They like walk down the street and whip themselves with a cat of nine tails on the back until their back is like bloody raw. And that's kind of their way to get to that state. Like, I just want people not to be demonstrably harming themselves in this process. And if they're not doing that, I have nothing to say about it. It's their pleasure drive versus mine.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
So
I
the
thank you
only
for
problem in this particular
admitting
thing
the
is
logical
that
correlation there. One thing I have found within the last day of talking to people about that's weird about the Orthodox Church, because I've been leaned towards looking into that, because they're very based and they're not woke. They're like one of the Christian sects that's not getting caught up in all this woke nonsense. But the Orthodox apparently still allow what is usually correlated with Catholics. They allow indulgences, meaning that you can like purchase with money like forgiveness of sins or excuses for sins. So yeah, and again, I'm not trying to argue for orthodoxy. I'm trying to look for truth, and I'm trying to keep an open mind and understand other people as best I can. But yeah,
all I'm saying
flagellation
is that
in Christianity that's some weird crap.
yeah, I'm just saying when you have an objective principle coming from a meta cosmic entity, and that's saying you don't masturbate until, or don't have sex, or don't do these particular kind of things, do these kind of things, burn your wife, whatever, these things become dogma, since they're coming from such a high authority. And maybe you put your hand in a box and there are some good things in that box, but since there are some bad things in that box and you're supposed to put your hand in that box, you don't even have a choice. That's the problem.
What
Well,
I think about rigid dogma.
I think there's this false move or wrong move being made here where the attack is on religion. And the problem is that you guys are more concerned with dogmatism, right? But the issue is that dogmatism can come from like a lot of people. I could make good arguments that atheism and secular humanism can just lead to sort of justice advocacy and like critical race theory and all the stuff we see today, which is clearly dogmatic, right?
John.
You have to get away from demonizing and throwing the baby out with the bathwater by focusing on religion so much. And just be honest and say, well,
but it's like the most popular manifestation of dogmatism, and all this stuff, John.
Exactly, Pat.
By the billions.
Even the scientific method, right?
Okay,
but like
how many
Christians
One
at a time. Jesus,
yeah. Could I speak?
Guys, could we go in our time?
I haven't spoken in a while. I just want to go ahead and speak.
Crypto. Yes, you go first. And who else said me neither?
Me.
Yeah.
Crypto, you go first.
Yeah. All right.
Put your point, man.
Wait. Who's the one talking? Who's the one that told me to go first?
Smoke.
Just talk, man.
Oh, Hypno Toad.
Yes, sir.
This guy right here. All right. I think what really matters is like what is a religion? What defines a religion? And I think that's really what we need to go from there. It's like, oh, all religions are bad, but I mean, what is a religion? What is a cult? What is a sect?
Well, I'll try to define a religion, and I think the issue is
okay. Let's not sidetrack.
Evolutionary biologists, evolutionary-based thinkers, are essentially engaging in a sort of concept revision on what religions are, and all that means is that we think evolutionary-based thinkers think they have a better understanding of what religions are. They think that the way they define what a religion is much more accurate.
What's the definition, man?
So it's something like first off, from an evolutionary perspective, you would observe religions as ideas that were selected for based off their utility in aiding our survival. Now, there's this distinguishing factor that separates religions from just merely a cult, for example, and that's just the test of time, right? So there are certain ideas that pop up, get popular, and these cults emerge, but these ideas
So ideas that are selected for, what are these ideas?
Die out. But
wait, hold on. I can understand you. Wait. Can you just wait? Sorry. I couldn't hear you. Can you just define a religion again? I just couldn't hear you, man. Can you just define what a religion is again?
He didn't define a religion. That's a problem.
Define what your mother is.
Do we have a couple trolls in the room or something?
I'm a troll, but I'm also a moderator.
You said there are ideas that are selected for that evolutionary-based thinkers are doing constant revision, but what the fuck is our religion, John? Come on.
I think religion and worldview are the same thing.
Usually
worldview is a way that you try to describe that ultimate belief system a person says by taking the religious component out of it. I think the atheistic worldview is a religion.
Well, just to be more specific and to try to back you up on that claim that you just made, we would say something like religions are essentially worldviews and ideas that are centered around axiomatic moral claims about the world. That would be a very accurate interpretation of what a religion is. When we see this in the world, we call that religion. When people band together, they have a worldview. And
Can
this
I ask you a
worldview
question?
is centered around moral and ethical axioms. That's a
Yeah. What do you
religion.
mean
And we can
by
look at veganism, for example. Veganism is clearly
axiomatic
a religion.
claims?
What do you mean by
Like, what do you mean
axiomatic
by
claim?
axiomatic claims?
That's a black and white definition.
It's
If you have
something
to
that
ask
is
that, please
asserted
just Google the definition.
No, one at a time, please. Answer his question.
Okay, so what I mean by axiom here, like in terms of in defining a religion, when people have a set of beliefs that are centered around moral and ethical axioms, that just means that, like, axiom there means
But I mean,
like a
that's
presupposition,
like
if
because
you
I mean
will.
you're
Like,
defining axioms as like moral and ethical. Like moral and I could ask you like what is moral, what is ethical, and like we could go into like hundreds of
I
hours
mean,
like
that's not
based on
what
what that
John
is. Like you
did.
I
can't.
hope we're not
Yeah,
getting
it's like
called out
you can't
for
say
views
that.
on what axioms are.
Okay, here's the thing. For example, let's take Hinduism, right? Like God says in Gita that I made these four castes. That's an axiomatic claim. That's true for itself because God said it. That's what he's saying. It's not hard to understand.
God ain't say shit.
Can
Humans say
I
shit.
can I ask a question? Can I ask
Listen,
a
an
question?
axiom would be something like, I think
Hey, we
there's
have
fire.
terms here.
Consciousness is something I can't deny. Like, we all have axioms, is the point. Like, I hope everyone's on the same page here, right?
So I
An
mean,
axiom
C.S.
is to
Lewis. So
ideas
I mean, I just have a
like an
question, man.
axle
Jesus.
is to a car. So an
Yeah.
axiom is an idea that all your philosophy and other ideas rotate around. It's like an
An
axle.
axiom
So
is literally a
a
statement
winning
that is true for
philosophy, right?
itself.
A
So it's like
winning,
fundamentalism. Like
It's
like a
true for
winning
itself.
fundamentalists
philosophy.
would say
So
the
let's take the
Bible is
example of
true
vegans,
and
right?
literal, and I build everything upon that. So that would be an axiom
Okay,
for
so
I
I have
can
a
Christian
read you the
question. I
fundamentalists.
have a really
definition.
good question. I have
Well,
a
look at the
question. My
vegan.
It better
question.
be a
Vegan, for
good
example.
goddamn question.
Yeah, it is a fucking good goddamn question, man. All right, so let's say I'm from Seattle, man. All right, there's the Seahawks.
All right.
Yeah, and I feel you, right? So it's like the Seahawks, right? The Seahawks, the football team, man. Like we won the Super Bowl in 2013, 7 years ago. Okay. So C.S. Lewis talks about something called chronological snobbery, where we think about something from like 700 years ago is not as valid as it is today, just because of the fact that it is from a long time ago. So let's say we take someone from 700 years ago and place them in a Seahawks stadium in 2013 during the East and West Conference Nationals, and you have a bunch of people dressed as birds, worshiping, cheering on people on a stadium, cheering, dressed as worshiping a certain ideal, worshiping a
Oh my
bird,
God, make your
You
point.
and
know, games
asking for
like
them certain to
football.
win. So what I'm saying is like you don't think that kind of idealism, cheering as they score a point, as a certain group of people score a point, dressing all in the same way, acting in a certain way when the team plays a certain play. You don't think that that's a religion in itself?
No,
Well, you
but
don't want
I'm
to
sure
call
it's
you don't want
properties.
to blatantly
That
call it a
is
Obviously.
religion, but
qualified
I
what
think that's a
backs you
jump.
up, right? You could easily argue that games like football and these types of things we see in our culture are clearly our way of entertaining deep tribalistic tendencies and biological tendencies that are it's a deep part of who we are as humans. That's the case. Just like religion is a deep part of who we are. People want to be religious. People want to be spiritual. And games like football, you're absolutely right. This is a sort of tribalistic ritual behavior when people are fighting over their football teams and shit in the
I
stadiums.
mean, you got people dressing up like a bird. Okay, you got people dressing up like a bird. Okay, that's I mean, like
I mean,
even right
think
now, it's
about
like
it.
yeah,
If
the
I think you
Seahawks,
are
but I mean at the
urgent
same
for
time, like
war,
if you
all right,
really think about it,
us
like
versus them.
commonsensically, like common sense, like if you got people dressing up like a bird to support a certain belief or to support a certain group of people, I mean that's that's
Yeah,
religious.
they're supporting a fucking sports team though. It's like
Yeah, so that sports team would be the religion that they're worshiping because their emotions depend on how that sports team performs.
I don't think that religion is the right correlation to sports. I think war is the right correlation to sports. And a person from the 1300s seeing a Seahawk game would assume that a war was happening, and he would wonder why they weren't going full on and killing people.
So I think that the missing component.
Honestly, we should have.
I think that the missing component here is a doctrine.
I just don't know how we jump from axioms to this. Like this is a total change of topic.
I didn't want to add
it's
something.
like it's like two
No, no,
opposites.
I think no.
this
I don't think it's opposites at all. I think they're very, very related. I think they're very, very related. I think people who are religious tend to be religious in their beliefs of supporting certain football teams or whatnot. I mean, you see people who, I mean, their entire emotions depend on how their team does or whatnot, and they rob, they hurt people, they act in certain ways based on something, an entity totally outside of themselves that they support. They support in their clothing. They support in the way they dress, which is clothing.
It's religious. It's
the way they act.
tribalistic. It's
Yeah. I
ritualistic.
mean, I don't think you can take tribalism out of religion. I think a lot of religion is tribalistic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I
it doesn't
think
mean that all tribalism is religious, right?
I think you're
No,
making the
I'm not
Jordan
saying that.
Peterson
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that all tribalism is religion. I'm not saying that all religion is tribalism. I'm just saying that they are mixed in each other. And I think right now, I think there are a lot of gray areas. And I think like when people say religion,
you're saying that tribalism is like a
religion
key
is
property
bad.
of religion, right?
I'm saying, I think, yeah. I would say that.
Okay, here's the thing.
Yeah,
If there are two
I mean, that's
concepts,
fair enough.
A and B, and they both share a similar subconcept C, that doesn't make A equals B. Okay, if there is religion that has tribalism underneath it, if there is team play that has tribalism underneath it, doesn't make team play equals religion. I think Jordan Peterson does this too. Sure.
I'll just say, I
Go
think
ahead.
the thing I was just going to say, I think the thing I'm most religious of is my favorite hockey team. Like it even makes it, like when the Canucks lost in 2011, I definitely shed a tear because I was so sad. And I get really floored and driven out of my seat, and I'm swearing at a box at my TV screen because I'm just so triggered by what's going on.
Yeah, and that's fine. Like that's not wrong. Like that's totally fine. Like tribalism
called
is
the
like
cucks?
a human instinct. Like that's totally
No,
fine.
it's wrong. That's just religious.
No, it's not
behavior.
wrong. Why is that wrong?
Oh, the
Why is that wrong?
I think my volume cut out there. I was like, you literally named your team? The Canucks.
No, like that's not
Okay.
wrong. I mean, like, dude, like that's a lifestyle. I mean, you can't say that like just because someone supports a certain team and is affected by how a certain team performs,
No,
like,
that's what
oh,
we
they're
call,
wrong. You can't say
toxic
that.
masculinity.
What are you talking about?
That's what we call toxic
John, what did he say?
masculinity, right?
I think religions kind of like they have to include, like, I'm just saying colloquially when people say religion, like if you walk down the street and you say something about religion, people think that it has something to do with a god, right?
It's my religion.
Yo, I think this
Jordan
is like
Peterson also
I think
thinks
this
this.
is like
What are we doing?
I
But what is
I'm
the
just
point of this
saying-
conversation? It's basically a bunch
No.
of people agreeing that religion is like an evolutionary adaptation and it's got benefits. Like
Yeah, so it's inevitable. It's inevitable.
and saying the same thing over and over and over. So
They're still
so
gonna
is there,
hit
is
us.
there
I
like
wanted
a
to say
point of
what I
contention?
think.
I was
I
told
think
I could go
Christianity
next.
pushes back against rigid dogma. I grew up in Christianity, and one of the 10 Commandments I always had a problem with, and I didn't understand, was "Thou shalt not make a graven image." And people like try to like simplify that and say that it means don't make a physical idol, like don't make a golden calf or something like that. But that didn't seem very congruent with the values and the depth of the other commandments. I think, and a lot of people disagree with me, I think that commandment, that idea that they're posing in Judaism and Christianity, is to say that God is infinite, and don't try to boil God down into something finite that you can completely get your mind around and describe perfectly. It's an abstract idea.
Yeah, that's why there's scripture
and don't
verses
try to like
the
finite.
devil was an intellect.
I mean, but the Old Testament talks about the reasoning behind it. You know, it's
There
like,
are other
well,
scripture
I mean,
verses
you're probably
along the
right,
lines
Villain, in
of
what you said, but they're
knowledge is
also
the
focused
beginning
on,
of the will.
you know, how they didn't want people worshiping the fucking, you know, statue itself instead of like the real God.
But I mean, I don't think that's
that's what
totally
that
apart from
commandment's
what he
about.
said. Like, I don't
No,
think
I mean,
that's
that's
totally
what it
apart from
says
what
in
he
the
said.
Bible.
The limits of
literally.
your intellect and your knowledge.
Okay, how can that not be a plot for manipulation? How can that not be a trick where they are stopping us from being critical? You know, you have to think
Because
about that.
I think what he's saying is like some things that we can fully comprehend are manifested in the physical, right? So that's what we say a graven image, and some things that we cannot comprehend are in terms of infinite. Like none of us can comprehend infinity, right? So I
Yeah,
think
true.
yeah,
If I
exactly. So
could
I
just
think the idea of attributing finite to the physical, I think that's totally fine for him to do that.
Can I do a quick response?
Sure, man.
With
Go ahead.
JP, we were arguing about everything is subjective to some degree, and
Yeah.
and where it's kind of like so these people that think through objectivity, they're silly into thinking that, and where it's kind of like he's arguing for you to think delusional more away
Okay, can
from
I ask you something?
based on, don't
Can I
cut
ask
me
you
Let
off,
him
something?
finish.
please.
Kim, let him finish. Let him finish. Okay, Nivek, talk.
So you more leaning away from objective fact and logical causality of reality, right? Would be more of a bad thing. So you should more think, through the subjective delusion of your mind in order to navigate the environment. So if you wake up and you did that for one day, you'd fucking be dead. You know, you'd walk off a cliff. So, I mean, we do this every day when we get out of beds. We take in objective reality and we approach it in
No.
in
That's a
understanding, and
semantic
we approach things in
disaster,
a
though.
logical way.
Listen, this is a great place to take the conversation, but in the great debate, the accusation being levered against the atheists from the theistic side is that to these atheists from a materialist, scientific materialist, reductionist, whatever you want to call it, world, the atheist worldview, right? Everything is merely subjective. So things like goodness, for example, when people say, "Oh, well, God is good," God is synonymous with what we mean by
Is that
good.
true
Goodness
though?
exists. These people are like, no, it's just subjective. Your idea of good may be different than what these other people might. So they fall completely. You're
But
right.
that's a fallacy in itself, right? It's an appeal to consequences fallacy, right?
No, man. There are things that we didn't know fact or truth. It was through religion we did that. But with the Enlightenment,
I don't
people were
think
saying
atheists
no.
do
We should
that.
more reason through fact and logic in order to approach things of objective fact and reality and
Right.
that was offense to God. It's kind of like, no. If biblically, if you say this is this way, then that's it. You don't argue with that. But if it's established
Oh
factually
my
that that's
God,
not the
man.
case.
Well, I just want to
Hey,
point out that
can I
there are
say
scripture
something? Can I
verses
say
that
something?
describe, right, this major concern with reason and knowledge. There are scripture verses like the devil was an intellect, that knowledge is the beginning and the end of the world. So these people were picking up on something, and I think you should try your best to understand what it was. This whole
Yeah, for you
ignorance
to
is
be
bliss
stupid to
stuff,
control you. That's what it was
like
about.
Yo, can
no,
I say
like for
something
example,
real
Okay,
quick? Just
let's let
really,
look at
JP.
really quick.
incredibly
Just
influential
really,
thinkers such
really
as
quick.
Hegel, right? A lot of these people were sort of
I just,
primitives, right? They didn't
yeah,
agree
I
with
just had
what
something to
reason and
say.
the industrial
They don't want you
revolution.
Oh my
revolting
God!
against
I either say
monarchism.
it or let John
Yeah,
speak. Make your choice,
yeah.
man.
They
So
don't want to
yeah,
revolt
okay. You
against
know what I'm saying,
monarchism. Is
dude?
what it is.
I just don't want to get muted. That's the thing, man. Because I've been muted before. I guess so. It's
Hey,
like
look,
some people.
you're already
So it's like,
autistic enough as it is, man. If you got
hold
something
on.
to
So
say,
some
go say it
people, I
instead of
got,
fucking beating about the bush, asking
Okay,
for permission and
Get
interrupting
in,
anyway.
man.
yeah.
So
Why are
what do
you
you got to
so
say?
angry, man?
What
Why
do
are
you got
you
to say?
angry?
You
Just go ahead and say it. Go ahead and say
Why are you so angry?
Calm
he
Jesus
down,
said
What
it
does
guys.
that
loud
have to do with
already.
anything?
Relax.
Okay,
Go ahead and
no, no,
speak.
no, 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 no. Okay, hold on, hold on. Okay,
Okay,
so
don't bother
some
to say
people,
it then.
no, no. Some people are arguing that everything is subjective. Yeah,
Yeah.
is that an objective statement or subjective statement?
I
Well,
mean,
the
they basically.
postmodernists argue, I'll answer this. The postmodernists argue that objective truth may be out there, but we don't have access to it because our sensory perception is limited, and the world or the objective reality comes to us filtered through our sensory perception. Therefore, it's diluted down. We don't have direct access to the way the world actually is. So it's merely a battle of narratives.
So
Truth, as we
is
know
what
it,
you're
and
saying true?
reason are
Is what
merely
you're
tools
saying
of
true?
oppression.
Is what you're
He
saying
doesn't know.
true?
He doesn't know. It's his
Okay, so
interpretation.
what I'm saying is, so he doesn't know, right? Is the fact that he doesn't know? So is the fact that he doesn't know true or not true?
Okay.
Well, these
So
people, these people are sort of post-truth as you know it, clearly, right?
Is that true? Is that true or not true?
Okay,
well,
here's
I'm guessing you're subscribing to
Kim.
what's called the correspondence theory of truth, which is like the cookie cutter.
So what I'm saying,
guys, sorry, could I ask?
Is what you're is
Guys,
what
could we
you're
ask? Could I
saying
ask that we
true
move this
or not
into?
true?
Excuse me. Hello. Could I ask that we move this into the God?
Yeah, it's true.
Voice channel now. Is that alright? Because we're gonna end this live session now. So if you guys want to continue talking, you can go to the God voice channel. If you guys all find it, we can move this on there. For those of you in the YouTube live, thank you very much for tuning in. Appreciate you watching, and we'll